Thank you, Catherine. That was lovely. I want to thank you and Virginia and the worship community, committee rather, and all of you for inviting me to be part of the service this morning. I am honored. It's wonderful to be here with you. I had hoped to talk about the Muppets this morning, but apparently that topic is taken this month, so. But I would like to start with a quick show of hands. How many of you believe in Santa Claus? Okay. How about the Easter Bunny? Okay. Tooth Fairy?
I am all of
Okay,
those things.
okay. How about werewolves? Okay. So let's change gears. So raise your hand if you believe in justice. Okay. Great. How about mercy? How many of you believe in fear? Okay. And how about generosity? Who believes in generosity? Excellent. Okay, so now the next question is, what is the difference between the first group and the second group? And for me, this gets a bit tricky, because other than the fact that most of us don't believe in most of the first group, and most of us do believe in all of the second group, I think maybe they have more in common than not. So to clarify that, this talk started as a relatively simple exploration of faith as I've experienced it, what it means to me as a UU, and it was spurred by a short passage in a book, but that got derailed or at least redirected by what we used to call in school current events. And incidentally, our sixth principle plays into this as well. But let me go back to where I started, and I'd like to turn to a quotation from Sir Terry Pratchett. And for those, anybody familiar with Pratchett's work? We got a few. Okay. For those not familiar, he was the author of a series of fantasy satire books that were set on a world called the Discworld, which was appropriately a flat disc that was being carried on the back of 4 very large elephants who were being carried through space on the back of a giant flying tortoise called Great Atween. Other than its physical characteristics, the Discworld is a lot like ours, with the main difference being that on the Discworld, magic is real and is a force, kind of like gravity, and it's treated very much the same way. It's not really the point. I just wanted to make it clear that this quotation comes from an unusual source for something that has deeply challenged my thinking about faith and belief to the extent that I've been moved to share it with others, such as yourselves today. And I grew up a UU, so being asked to reflect on our personal values and beliefs and faith is nothing out of the ordinary for me, but I never really thought of myself as a person of faith. I maintained a sort of casual agnosticism, not questioning the genuineness of others' experiences or beliefs, allowing the possibility of forces larger than ourselves and beyond our understanding, which we may refer to as divine. And that was pretty much the way that I operated for much of my adult life. But as time has gone on, I've been forced to think a little more deeply about all of that, and one source of that reflection comes from Pratchett. So for context, this quotation is from a novel called The Hogfather, and the character who is speaking is Death. Now, Death is an anthropomorphized version of the Western notion of the Grim Reaper physically, but his unique position in the cycles of life give him both affection for the living and their habits, as well as occasional puzzlement. The title character, the Hogfather, is the Discworld's version of Santa Claus. And the main plot of the novel revolves around an attempt to remove him from the universe by characters known as the Auditors. Enough about that. Death here is speaking to his adoptive granddaughter, Susan, who has expressed her own puzzlement at the apparent significance of the Hogfather, the impact of his disappearance, and the fact that all of the children believe in him, which is what makes him real. And she asks Death if humans need fantasy to make life bearable. And Death replies, forgive my accent, as if it was some kind of pink pill? No. Humans need fantasy to be human, to be the place where the falling angel meets the rising ape. You have to start out learning to believe the little lies, tooth fairies, that sort of thing, so that you can believe in the big ones, justice, mercy, duty, that sort of thing. Take the universe and grind it down to the finest powder and sieve it through the finest sieve, and then show me one atom of justice, one molecule of mercy. And yet you act as if there is some ideal order in the world, as if there is some rightness in the universe by which it may be judged. This set me to thinking. This idea of belief, of faith being a thing that actually makes us human, had never actually occurred to me before. And I found that the notion has merit. The idea that faith is things that we believe in without physical or perhaps direct evidence. And so what are the things that I believe in with no physical or direct evidence? Justice, mercy, absolutely. Love, certainly. Peace, which is almost as difficult to define simply as love is. I was raised to believe deeply in it, and I still do. So, does something need a physical manifestation to be real? Obviously not. And is there a distinction between faith and belief? Are they true synonyms, or are they rather meaning adjacent? And yes, I made that phrase up, but I hope it describes the idea accurately. So to me, while the distinction may seem largely semantic, the two words occupy different places in my thinking. I believe, or believe in, things that seem to have strong evidence to support their existence, and that evidence is trusted and or widely accepted. I believe the world is, that the world is round, for instance. Faith, on the other hand, requires some sort of leap, and I don't think that phrase is an accident. The evidence that faith is based on is usually an interpretation of either observed phenomena or internal convictions or some combination of them. So, for example, I believe in both the power and necessity of nonviolent political action. There is evidence in history that it can be effective in making meaningful change. I have faith that there will come a time when people don't use warfare as a way to achieve peace, to resolve conflict or disputes, or see oppression and harm of others as a way to achieve justice. So faith for me is tied to what I can imagine beyond what is, meaning what I observe or understand. Belief, then, is a term that I attach to things that may not exist in the physical world, but have strong, widely shared evidence or understanding. Faith is a little more tenuous. So let me return to Pratchett briefly to extend and clarify this idea, and it's maybe not an accident that Discworld is, well, a disc. This is an idea of our world that in one version or another dominated human thinking for as long as people have thought about it, until about 500 years ago, which in the grand scheme of things is practically the blink of an eye. So nowadays, most people on Earth agree that the world is in fact a sphere orbiting the sun, another sphere, which is part of a galaxy, and so on. And there are those who live in isolation who aren't privy to the massive amounts of information that most of us are bombarded with. There are flat earthers who take the authority of scripture or some other source over the evidence that the rest of the world accepts. But by and large, people recognize that the world is a sphere, that the solar system functions in a describable way, and that while there is still a great deal we don't know about the universe and how it works, those basic things are a matter of widespread acknowledgement and belief. We understand how earlier people decided the Earth was flat because they had little physical evidence to suggest otherwise. Seemed a reasonable assumption. And interestingly to me, we wrestle then with how to adapt our faith to the realities as they change. So the Bible, the Torah, Quran, Bhagavad Gita, and so on were all written by people who thought the Earth was flat if they thought about it at all. So does that mean that what they wrote is not valid or meaningful today? Of course not. So you may be asking yourself, what does all of this have to do with faith? So I use that as an example to illustrate something about my own beliefs and faith. So as I said, I believe in the power and importance of nonviolent action in implementing social and economic change and in furthering the causes of justice, which is another thing I believe in. And I have faith that there can come a time when that belief is not only widely held, it is treated as a shared, reasonable, and appropriate way to view our interactions with each other, just as a round Earth that orbits the sun is part of our broad understanding of things today. So why do I have that faith? What evidence is that based on? Well, to begin with, I have the rather unusual idea that addressing perceived injustice or persecution through deliberate violence, oppression, or discrimination against others seems illogical and perhaps even nonsensical. But the notion that you can use those oppressive tools to create a better world either for yourself or for people more broadly is not only common today, it has been in practice for most of human history. And it is an underlying assumption of most governments' policies on everything from taxes to their relationships to other countries and so on. And I don't think it's limited to governments. It seems to me that in the world today, for many people, the ideas of achieving peace through violence, often by portraying oneself as a victim to justify treating others as less than human, are commonplace. Now, I don't believe most people apply those ideas to themselves in those terms, excuse me, because I've rarely met a person who doesn't want to think of themselves as a good person, who's on the side of right. By the way, that's another word that could go on death's list of stuff you can't find in the physical universe. So let me turn to another part of that conversation to sort of move the conversation further, and this is where the sixth principle enters my reflection. Because a little later, Susan points out that people need to believe in that order, that rightness, pardon me, or why, what's it all about? And Death says, you need to believe in things that aren't true. How else can they become? So, what are the things that we believe in that aren't true so that they can become? And more urgently, what is the usefulness of faith, as I've defined it here, in this current political moment? As I said, I believe in direct nonviolence. I have faith that there will come a time when the idea of using violence to create peace or oppression to create justice will be as outmoded as the idea of a flat earth seems to us today. And I recognize at the moment that that time seems likely to be a very long way off. But without that faith, how do I expect myself to carry on, to do the things that are needed, to make my voice heard at possible risk to myself and to those I love? These are very troubling questions. I think perhaps that faith, at least for me, is the thing that sustains us in difficult times, whether political, personal, social, or philosophical. We have faith that our children will find a way to thrive after failing a math test. We have faith that we'll find a way to heal when our hearts are broken. When I look at how authoritarian regimes rise, I see that ultimately too many people lose faith, oh gosh, I'm so sorry, in the possibility of being able to have some meaningful impact on their societies. Now, I would hope that the changes I've spoken of can come about without great devastation or any of the apocalyptic catastrophes that many folks warn us about, but hope is a whole different thing entirely. I'm not that kind of optimist, I'm afraid. I suspect in my heart that those changes will only come about as the result of a great deal of hard work and sacrifice by people who believe in those things, whether they're giving up time to contact lawmakers and officials, money to support organizations that are trying to bring about those changes, or potentially even their livelihoods and their very lives by putting themselves in harm's way to demonstrate against government or corporate policies. And that brings me to the third word that I have to consider in this reflection, which is trust. The relationship of those words, belief, faith, and trust, for me is complex and intertwined. Trust is a necessary component of both, and it must be present for either of them to exist. When I believe something based on indirect but compelling evidence, why do I trust the sources? Americans have demonstrated a pronounced lack of trust in government agencies, but where and how that mistrust is distributed seems largely based on political viewpoint and the information sources that they agree on or, again, trust. This is a rabbit hole I'm not proposing to go down, but I think it's important to acknowledge the significant role that trust and where it's placed plays in any investigation of our own faith and beliefs. If we have faith in something that is not tangible or the result of substantial evidence, then we clearly trust something, some combination of our own experience, logic, and intuition that is as individual and mysterious in its own way as faith is. So, to return more or less to where I began and get back to my original question, do we need faith to be human? Is the ability to believe in things that we don't have direct experience of something that defines us as a species? After some consideration, the answer to me seems relatively simple. As Pratchett suggests, it is to be human, to imagine and contemplate things beyond what all animals, including humans, crave and seek, and for me to provide guidance as to what I should do with my life and how I should try to do it. Without the faith that I have in the possibility of human life without warfare, deliberate injustice, and oppression, moments like today might seem hopeless and insurmountable. And while dire times certainly test our faith in the potential for things like the sixth principle's goal of world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all, it's essential for me to examine and reaffirm that faith and to continue to be present and to make my voice heard in whatever ways I believe will be most effective, both within my community and in the larger world. And that, I suspect, is what faith is really for. So the question that I would want to leave you with is this: what are the things that we have faith in that keep you going in difficult times? And how can we lean into those things as we do what we need to do for ourselves, our families, our communities, and for the world? I find that I need to ask myself those questions a lot these days. Answering them is never easy, but I believe it's a very rewarding thing for me to meditate on. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Peter. And now we'll have our closing hymn, number 194, Faith is a Forest, played by Catherine Cattabiani. Please rise in body or spirit as you're able.
Our closing words today come from my grandfather, the Reverend A.J. Muste, from an essay entitled The Problem of Discontent, which was also delivered as a commencement address at his graduation from Hope College when he was 20 years old. Character is built by action rather than by thought. Contemplation does not beget virtues, but out of the elements of daily struggle, we mold at last conceptions of justice, parity, and truth that build that temple of morality which is the chosen seat of true religion. Revelation is powerless if it enlightens only the reason, and faith is valid only when it leads to action. So ultimate satisfaction is found only